Hey, super scientists, we're looking at Eco 6 and we're going to be talking about the cycles of matter. We're going to start off with the carbon cycle. So we know that carbon is one of our elements, and the carbon cycle is just going to be looking at how carbon transfers from Earth's surface to the atmosphere, back and forth, and in what ways it's released and what ways it's taken in. So if you look at this image, there's a lot of different things that are going on. So plants and trees are going to be taking in carbon dioxide, but when they die, when they start decomposing, that carbon that is in that life form is then going to be released into the soil, and some of it may be released into the atmosphere as well. Carbon is also going to be released by people and animals. So people are going to breathe out carbon dioxide. Animals also will breathe out carbon dioxide, but one other thing happens with living organisms, animals, specifically a lot of livestock, is the production of methane, CH4. So basically that means that animal waste, they're pooping out a lot of methane, pooping out a lot of carbon. And so that carbon is going to be released and will go into the atmosphere as well, and some may be absorbed into the soil. One other human activity has a lot of carbon related to it, and that is the burning of fossil fuels. So burning fossil fuels produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And fossil fuel emissions are responsible for contributing largely to global warming and our changing climate. And so this particular human activity is going to release a lot of carbon dioxide. And the problem with that is that there is so much carbon dioxide that's released that the environment can't recover from that as quickly as it would us just breathing out the carbon dioxide. Because remember, carbon dioxide is natural. So we naturally will breathe out carbon dioxide. So the problem with the fossil fuels is that we're putting way too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Oxygen cycle is next. So oxygen, again, is one of our elements. Oxygen is something that's very important to us because we need oxygen in order to breathe. Most available oxygen is going to come from photosynthesis. It's a product of photosynthesis that's released by plants that are on land, terrestrial plants, and also algae and phytoplankton in water, specifically in the ocean, because the ocean is so large, so expansive. It's going to have a lot of algae and cyanobacteria and phytoplankton that are going to be going through photosynthesis as well. So plants are going to release oxygen. Algae will release oxygen, and people and other animals are going to be taking in oxygen. One other thing that's really interesting here is the reference to the lithosphere. So most oxygen is stored in oxide minerals in the Earth's crust and mantle, which is the lithosphere, but it's bound to rocks and it's unavailable for use. So there's a ton of oxygen that's stored in the ground, like with iron oxides and things like that, rust, oxidized minerals, but we can't use that. So you can't just pick up a rock and breathe the oxygen from it because it's not in a usable form. It's not in a form that you can use it. And oxygen is also going to be used by animals, plants, bacteria, fire, in combustion, decomposition, rusting, and the process of oxidation. So a lot of things that are alive and also not alive, a lot of processes will use oxygen as well. The nitrogen cycle is next. So nitrogen is going to be really important for a lot of different organisms. I've added a few pictures here, a few different comments. So these are legumes, and you may or may not have heard of these before. Basically, these are just beans, bean plants, like soybeans, for example. So there's lots of different peas and beans represented here. So legumes are specific types of plants that are going to contain nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And those nitrogen-fixing bacteria are going to live on and around the plant roots. And it's a symbiotic relationship with the plants and the bacteria, the rhizobia bacteria. So what will happen in this relationship between the plant roots and the nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the legumes is that it will be a mutualistic relationship. So both the bacteria and the plant will benefit. So the plant is going to get the usable nitrogen that's in the form of NH4, and then the bacteria is going to have a place to live. So the bacteria is going to get that nitrogen, is going to fix it which means it converts the atmospheric nitrogen into NH4. And then the plant will benefit from then getting the usable oxygen. So there's a couple other things that are going to be taking in or releasing nitrogen. Volcanic eruptions, oddly enough, are going to release nitrogen as well. Lightning, so during storms, lightning is something else that is capable of fixing nitrogen and converting the atmospheric nitrogen into NH4. Things that are decomposing, organic matter, waste, which just means poop, dead leaves, dead animals. So those things, as they're decomposing, will return nitrogen to the soil. Decomposing bacteria form nitrogen compounds, so they're going to be breaking those things down as well. And nitrogen is very important for us, but it's specifically important for plants. Plants need the nitrogen because they need nitrogen to make proteins. And proteins, we know proteins are important for cell growth and repair of tissues. And animals, including people, are able to eat proteins, but plants don't eat, right? So they need to be able to make those proteins, and they're going to use nitrogen in order to do that. And our last cycle of matter is water. So we know the chemical formula for water is H2O. So water is made of hydrogen, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. So the 3 main steps that we think of with the water cycle is evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. And this is a funny little graphic that's showing you the water cycle. So we have some large reservoirs of water. We have the ocean, which contains a lot of water, of course, and then we have rivers and lakes and ponds and things like that. But remember that most of the water on Earth is going to be stored in the oceans, but most of the fresh water, there's only 3% of all the water on the Earth that is fresh water. Most of the fresh water is going to be frozen, so it's going to be stored in glaciers, in permafrost, and icebergs, and polar ice caps, and things like that. So when water heats up, it will turn from liquid to a gas, and so these water molecules are evaporating. When that water vapor, that water as a gas, begins cooling down, it will turn back into liquid droplets. And if that happens around condensation nuclei, if it happens around dust particles, then that will form clouds. And when you get enough of those water droplets together, they'll all start kind of hanging out, and they will eventually fall as precipitation. Precipitation is either going to be rain, sleet, snow, or hail. We have a river that's forming here and some runoff. So runoff is just the water moving across the surface, the water that has not been absorbed down into the ground. And our groundwater is going to be the water that is underground. It's going to be contained in this rock layer called the aquifer. So remember that the water that we have on Earth is all the water that we have. So there's a little dinosaur right here. It says long ago dinosaurs may have drunk the same water that we drink today. So literally you could be drinking dinosaur pee, right? Because all the water that we have is all the water that we have. And that's why we need to be very careful to conserve water and not be wasteful.